Are we therefore ready to agree that God exists now? That we have seen Richard Hitchens' proofs of evolution fail, the intelligent design alternative succeed, and that his critiques of theology are self-serving? By itself, my argument establishes a designer behind the universe, a Kantian architect, if you will. For the purposes of this debate, however, I think we're pretty close to closing escrow. Note that the full positive case for God's existence can and should be fleshed out. Typically, such a case flows from critical reflection on the big questions of life. Why is there something rather than nothing? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why should we take morality seriously? Why is the world comprehensible to our minds? Why does mathematics, presumably a human invention, have such a precise purchase on physical reality? Each of these questions can, in my view, be answered better within a theistic than an atheistic worldview. And then there are the specific historical questions. Did Jesus really live at all? Which Christopher Hitchens seems to doubt. Did he resurrect from the dead? What is the evidence for that? If somebody raised from the dead, then it seems that there might be good evidence for the existence of a theistic deity. So all of those are questions we could raise, and I would raise them and address them if time permitted. But as I said, I'm taking a particular tack. Christopher Hitchens makes his case for atheism by looking to Darwinism. He needs that, and so I've focused on deconstructing that. And let me say this also. Intelligent design is a scientific program, but it has theological implications. That said, evolution, in the sense of a purely materialistic form of evolution, the type of evolution that Darwin came up with, also has implications. And I would say they are theological implications. They're anti-theological implications, but anti-theological implications are theological implications. When Stephen Jay Gould, for instance, who in his time was the best-known evolutionist this side of the Atlantic, remarked in his book, Ever Since Darwin, we know that we were not created in the image of a benevolent God. How does he know that? That's a theological claim. So intelligent design is friendly to theism in a way that evolution is not. And as I said, if you are an atheist, you must be an evolutionist. The implication runs from atheism to evolution. It does not run from evolution to atheism. It may be that God has just set up the world to evolve that way. That would be an option for a deity. But if you are an atheist, you must go with evolution. And a blind, purposeless form of it, one where you don't see any evidence of design. So that's where I'm going to leave the discussion about God's existence. I haven't argued for the full-blown deity, but I've gotten you at least into the ballpark of a deity. And so that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dembski. We're going to go ahead and actually pick up cards for those of you who would like to ask a question. If you could pass those cards to the aisles, we'll have some people around to pick up those cards, and those cards will make their way up to me after we hear the rebuttals from each of our speakers. So, Mr. Hitchens, 10 minutes for rebuttal.
I'll try and do less if I can, because I'd rather reserve time for questions if possible. But yes, after all, I've been challenged on a number of fronts, and that's what I enjoy. I was trying to think of something that I agreed with. But I found I had to disagree almost ab initio, as it were. An atheist does not have to be an evolutionist. Atheism long predates the discoveries. Atheism long predates the revolutionary discoveries of Charles Darwin. There was a time when the word scientist didn't exist. Actually, the word scientist is a late 19th century coinage that I sometimes feel we could do without. In the time of Sir Isaac Newton, for example, people who did the work of the sort that he did were called natural philosophers. And I think that it's important to realize that science is not just the study of the material world or laboratories. I mean, after all, Sir Isaac Newton may have been a very, very, very great scientist, but he maintained a furnace in his room in Cambridge at all times because he was also an alchemist and believed he would one day find out how to turn base metals into gold. He's one of a long line of people who were genius crackpots. He believed, for example, that the Pope was the Antichrist. Maybe it's true. And that if you could find the measurements of the old temple, that would be far more useful than knowing what the measurements of gravity were. But he was a natural scientist. He knew absolutely nothing about evolution. The work of Spinoza, the work of Voltaire, the work of Lucretius. Admittedly, Lucretius did work out Democritus and Epicurus as well at that period of the Hellenistic period. They did work out the world was made of atoms, a very brilliant thing for them to have done at the time. The mystery to me is only this, because none of these things necessarily depend on one another, why it is that organized religion has always been so hostile to discoveries of this sort, why it should take them so personally. The work of Lucretius, De Rerum Naturam, that established that we're made of atoms, and so is the rest of the system, was hated by the church for centuries. Only about 1 or 2 copies of it were allowed to survive. They didn't want you to know this. As you know, the church didn't want Galileo to look through a tube and see, would make the disconcerting discovery that the sun doesn't go round us, we go round the sun. I presume now no one is going to give me an argument about that today. Why would anyone care which way it worked? Well, because if the sun doesn't go round us, we're not the center of the universe, which makes it, doesn't it, fractionally less likely that we're the objects of the whole thing. If we revolve around something else, it could be we're not the sole object of a huge cosmic divine design. So what I've been trying to attack today, and I've given no reason to want to attack it less, is this reassuring idea that it's all about us, this solipsistic, selfish, I think, unscientific idea. The work of Darwin and later of innumerable writers, many of whom are Christian, on evolution, shows that there's absolutely no necessity at all for an incompatibility between a private belief in God and a recognition that we arose out of natural selection and random mutation. Let me just take the question of the eye. I think Dr. Dembski said I was obsessed with it. That's absolutely not true. It's simply that Darwin himself doubted at first that the eye could have evolved, given its complexity, and because the eye is the example most commonly brought up, so I thought, okay, in my book I'll take the most complex and the most difficult and the most well-known example. And you can look at my book, or you can look at a very brilliant chapter in Richard Dawkins' book, Climbing Mount Improbable, beautiful short chapter on the 25 different evolutions of the eye and the different ways in which it's taken place. I have contributed to this because I'm not a scientist. Only one small thing, but I'll give it to you anyway. You may have seen, you should have seen, a wonderful series made by the British Broadcasting Corporation called Planet Earth. It's the greatest photography of the natural world you'll ever see. It's absolutely extraordinary. And in one very fascinating case, they go to Indonesia, which has the largest caves we know underground on Earth, which have a whole series of life forms inside them, many of them not fully understood or explored yet, including a large number of life forms that we do already understand that fell into those caves when they were formed and ceased to live on the Earth's surface and in the sunlight, and started to make their lives underground. They are more or less exactly the same as they would be if they had remained where they were, but I noticed the salamander, the beautiful Indonesian lizard. Everyone's seen one in a zoo. There it was. It had been living for, David Attenborough told us in the program, X millions of years away from the sunlight in a cave. It had eyes. No, it didn't. It had perfectly eye-shaped indentations, exactly where the eyes used to be, like a little sketch or outline of an eye, but no socket. The socket had gone, the eye itself had gone. All you could see was the vestigial. It had adapted. It had decided to lose its eye. Most of our studies are about how people got hold of eyes. Dawkins's is the best one, whatever Dr. Dembski may say, of the different ways in which different creatures got different eyes. But no one until your humble servant, because I wrote off to my friends and my enemies and said, has anyone noticed this before, had thought, now how do animals lose their eyes? The same way they got them, by not needing them anymore, by adapting away. If you live underground, in the wet, in the dark, it's a big hazard to your survival to have a wet, useless spot that can't receive any light, two of them on your face. It can pick up infection, it can make you vulnerable. You lose it. It takes millions of years, but you'll lose it. That's what we're talking about, adaptability. Wrongly, it's said that Darwin talked of the survival of the fittest. People draw often cruel and inhuman conclusions from this and attribute it to Darwin. Didn't say anything of the sort. What he said is adaptability is what helps survival. If I told you that in parts of Africa where elephants are shot for their tusks, elephants are growing shorter tusks in reaction, you would, I'm sure, laugh. How would the elephant know how to do that? Elephant sees hunter, works out hunter wants tusk, is an ivory hunter, shrinks tusks to minimize chance of being shot. Don't be ridiculous. Well, no, that isn't, of course, what happens. What happens is the ones with long tusks get shot, quite a lot. And the ones with shorter or no tusks have, therefore, greatly enhanced opportunities of being the ones who survive and breed. And their descendants actually have shorter or no tusks. That's what adaptability is. That's what evolution is. It's not some kind of trick. In the time I've got, that's the best I can do on those points, on that point, because I want to come, in what remains to me, to the allegations made about my theology. Well, the archaeologists of the State of Israel, after the 1967 war, when Israel became, for many years, the possessor of the Sinai Peninsula, it's now given it back, and of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the biblical territories, had an unprecedented opportunity to show that the Bible story was archaeologically provable. And they were told by the founding leader of the State of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, go out, dig, find, he said, dig up the title deeds of our state. They had the strongest motive and the greatest opportunity any archaeologists have ever had. And the standard of Israeli archaeology is already extremely high, as you can tell from their national museums and the work of many great archaeologists such as Professor Finkelstein. And they had many years to do it. They couldn't find a single trace of anything that was remotely compatible with the story of the Exodus, the wandering, and the conquest of Canaan. Not one trace. On the other hand, what they could find, with the help of Egyptian archives, was enormous evidence in the opposite direction. Digging Up History is the book. It's very easy to get, very easy to read. It's a very impressive demonstration of what I call, and this is what to look for when you're looking for intellectual honesty in life, evidence against interest. In other words, people will say, I really wished, I really hoped I could find this. This was my ambition. Here is how. It wasn't compatible, wasn't doable in the light of the facts. I regard that as a very impressive piece of objective work on the part of Israeli scholarship. If you think that Jesus isn't a historical figure, it really only matters to you. What do I mean by that? For me, the most important thinker is Socrates, and the most important source of morality and philosophical comfort, by far. There's no evidence that Socrates existed either. It's not conclusive. That's to say, we only have, as we have in the case of Jesus, second-hand eyewitness reports of him. They're pretty persuasive, but they're not conclusive. He never wrote anything down, neither did Jesus. The stories about him are much more compatible than the ones of Jesus. The four Gospels contradict each other about everything from his birth, the circumstances of it, the flight into Egypt, very crucially, in all four cases, on the crucifixion and the resurrection. That all of them, just read them for yourselves. I'm sure you must have read them by now. The discrepancies are extraordinary. They don't amount to a historical figure in the same way as we know from coinage, from building, from parchments, not parchments, but from documents, tablets, other things, that Alexander the Great, for example, was a historical figure. But to me, if Socrates didn't exist, it wouldn't matter.